Check into a hotel expecting silence and sleep, but some legends keep their rooms long after the key is turned. The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel rises like a film still from another era. Its Spanish colonial arches, star-lined pool, and burnished hallways, holding the afterglow of premieres and soft-focus dreams. Yet among the hundreds of famous names stitched into its history, none surfaces more often than Marilyn Monroe. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, as modeling jobs slowly became bit parts and then luminous roles, she stayed at the Roosevelt, most famously in Suite 1200, a corner airy with generous light and a mirror that flattered and betrayed in equal measure. The story that staff repeat with a half smile, equal parts reverence and unease, centers on that mirror. Moved from her suite years later, it was rehung near a service corridor, where housekeepers began reporting the same uncanny punctuation to their workdays. They'd wheel a cart past, glance at the glass, and catch a woman in white standing just over a shoulder. When they turned, the corridor was empty, but in the reflection, a platinum figure lingered, not posing so much as existing, like a memory refusing to release its owner. Guests, too, have described breath-fog cold in the warm California air around the poolside cabanas where Marilyn was photographed early in her career. A sudden dip in temperature that leaves gooseflesh in broad sunlight. Night shift guards tell of monitors that briefly capture a pale silhouette crossing a hallway, only for the recording to sputter into static a second later, the way film burns when a projector stalls. Skeptics point out that Hollywood is a factory for myth and that mirrors play tricks. Believers counter that not every story survives for decades without an anchor. What makes the Roosevelt's Monroe reports feel different is the tone. She is not described as menacing or tragic in theatrical ways, but as watchful, wistful, an energy that seems to check itself in the very glass that helped construct her image. In life, she belonged to everyone and to no one, adored and isolated at the same time. And a hotel, more than a house, fits that paradox, a place to be seen and a place to vanish behind a door that was never quite hers. Newer guests who request Suite 1200 sometimes admit they slept poorly for reasons they can't name. Others leave a flower by the mirror that may or may not be the mirror, as if paying a quiet toll to pass unobserved. The Roosevelt leans into its film history aura, but it does not need to advertise this particular story. The staff will tell you it circulates on its own, a current in the building. Stand before that glass at midnight and hold your breath. If a second profile resolves beside yours, mouth tilted in that famous not-quite smile, will you call it pareidolia and move on? Or will you feel the hair rise on your neck and know that fame can make a person unforgettable to the point of being unable to leave? What would you believe if it were you in that hallway? Coincidence? Or a legend refusing to check out? Share where you land in the comments below. Chicago's Congress Plaza Hotel wears its age like armor, marble, murals, long corridors that seem to inhale and exhale with the traffic along Michigan Avenue. And for a century, it has collected stories the way old buildings collect drafts. Threaded through those tales is the name Al Capone, whose prohibition empire still casts a shadow wide enough to darken whole blocks in memory. The official record is more cautious than the legends. Historians will tell you there's scant paper linking Capone to a permanent suite or a command post at the Congress. But hauntings do not rely on notarized proof. Bellmen say footsteps pace above them when no guest is checked into that floor. Night auditors report muffled conversation and the clink of glasses in the Florentine room long after it's locked. A phantom meeting that disbands whenever a door opens. One guest swore that a short, thick-set man in a dark suit stood at the end of a hallway near an alcove. As she approached, the figure pivoted as if to enter a side door that didn't exist, then thinned into the grain of the air. Perhaps the most notorious legend is the sealed room. A number staff will not volunteer. Closed, they say, after too many incidents of furniture repositioned, blinds snapping up, and bedsheets tugged tight as if some invisible occupant insisted on order. Paranormal teams come and go with EMF meters and digital recorders, capturing cold spots that move like a person and the faint shuffle of leather soles. Skeptics counter that old buildings make old noises, that the city itself is a machine thrumming beneath the floor. Yet for those who feel watched in the Congress, the watching carries a personality, Not sorrow, not confusion, but a practiced vigilance, as though a man used to surviving ambushes still checks every exit. Capone lived by a calculus of control. He gathered people in plush rooms, weighed risks behind a smile, and turned hospitality into cover. If an imprint of that life lingers, it would make sense for it to pace, to patrol, to keep score even now. Chicago treats him as villain and myth simultaneously, a contradiction the Congress embodies with its mix of glamour and unease. Imagine walking the mezzanine alone at 2 a.m, carpet swallowing your steps, when another cadence joins yours a beat behind. Do you stop and offer your back to whatever history wants, or do you turn and meet the empty length of hallway like a dare? Would you book a night on the floor, rumored to be his, just to test whether the past notices you? Longtime maintenance staff talk about bricked-over doorways and service corridors leading to nowhere, about a freight elevator that stops on a dark floor uncalled as if obeying someone else's schedule. A few older Chicagoans swear their grandfathers delivered packages to suites under assumed names, and while memory is a pliable instrument, the confidence with which they tell it adds muscle to the myth. Tour guides point to tight corners and blind turns where a bodyguard would have stood, and to the warren of back passages that make the building feel like a chessboard. You can cross whole wings without touching the lobby if you know how. During renovations, contractors reported tools disappearing and reappearing in tidy stacks, as if some unseen supervisor insisted on inventory. Even the lake wind that snakes in through the revolving doors seems to change temperature on certain nights, an inland cold that makes your teeth click and your thoughts jump to the worst-case explanation. None of this proves anything, but taken together, it creates a texture you feel in your shoulders before you can name it, the way a city's old sins seep into architecture. Tell us if you'd take that elevator or choose the stairs in case you need to run, down in the comments. On Coronado Island, the Hotel del Coronado rises from the beach in bright angles and red roofs, a Victorian confection whose porches have watched Pacific weather and human theater for well over a century. Its most famous ghost story belongs to Kate Morgan, the young woman found dead on the grounds in 1892. But another figure sometimes shares the whispers. Errol Flynn, Hollywood's golden rogue, who made swordplay and mischief inseparable on screen and by many accounts, off it. Flynn was drawn to places where applause was built into the architecture, bars, ballrooms, verandas that staged a man even when he was only passing through, and the Dell offered just that, a place to be adored at noon and anonymous by midnight. Staff describe a tall man cutting the corner of an upstairs corridor with the confidence of someone who has permanent residence in other people's imaginations. A second look finds only the corner. Guests nursing a late drink at the bar have reported a sudden companionable chill, a bar stool easing as if taken, and the faint scent of tobacco and rum braided in the air with the ocean. Some encounters seem playful, a glass that nudges, a mirror catching a smile that is not yours, while others feel like a private joke made at your expense, an amused scrutiny that sends you back to your room earlier than planned. Investigators argue that not all haunts are traumas replaying. Some are attachments, a person magnetized to pleasure itself. If Flynn left an afterimage, it would be a posture rather than a plea, the echo of a man who refused to let the party end. But there are darker reports. A pressure in certain rooms like weather pushing at the ribs, laughter heard where the hallway turns. The sense that charisma can curdle into something predatory when there's no audience to charm. The Dell's staff will speak more readily about Kate Morgan, whose sadness fits the architecture of a ghost story neatly. Flynn's alleged appearances are rarer, stranger, more like photobombs from another century. Walk the upper floor after midnight and you might catch that whiff of smoke, hear that low laugh, and feel irrationally that you've been sized up and dismissed by a star decades gone. By day, the hotel is all postcards and weddings. By night, its Victorian bones announce themselves with the tiny complaints of old wood and old wiring, the sort of sounds a skeptic will catalog and a believer will count. A former housekeeper once described finding the imprint of a head on a pillow in an unoccupied room minutes after she had smoothed it flat. Another swore she heard a man humming a tune that belonged to no one in her generation. Down on the beach, couples taking midnight walks have looked up to see a figure on an upper veranda raising a glass to the dark water, the gesture as graceful as a curtain call. The figure fades when noticed, as if the applause ended. Guests who read about Flynn before arriving sometimes regret it. They report feeling performed at, preened over, as though the room itself expects an audience reaction. The Dell is proud of its history and careful with its legends, and staff are quick to separate verified events from folklore. But folklore has a way of acquiring its own kind of truth when it endures in the same place for decades. Perhaps that is what a haunting really is, repetition with personality. We're curious where you stand. Drop your take in the comments below. Hotels promise comfort and escape, but for some, the walls hold echoes that refuse to check out. If you want more tales that make every creak sound like a footstep, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And remember, legends don't always fade with the light. Some prefer the hallway after midnight.